They laughed at the orphan kid until he revealed where he came from. Tell us in the comments which city you're listening from. Click the like button, and let's begin the story. 11-year-old Daniel Carter sat alone at the back of the Riverside Middle School cafeteria, just as he did every day. The other kids rarely spoke to him. When they did, it was usually to mock the faded, hand-me-down clothes he wore or the worn sneakers that were 2 sizes too big. He had learned to keep his head down, to blend into the background, to become invisible. But on this particular October morning, everything changed. It started when Marcus Webb, the most popular kid in 6th grade, stood up during announcements and pointed directly at Daniel. "Hey everyone, look at Danny the Nobody," Marcus shouted across the cafeteria. "Bet he doesn't even know who his parents are." The laughter rippled through the room like a wave. Daniel felt his face burn with shame. He gripped his lunch tray so hard his knuckles turned white. Mrs. Patterson, the lunch monitor, shot Marcus a warning look, but the damage was done. The mockery continued in whispers and snickers throughout the day. By the time school ended, Daniel had decided he would never speak about his past. It was easier to remain a mystery than to open wounds that had barely begun to heal. What none of them knew was that Daniel Carter was not who they thought he was, and the truth about where he came from would shake the entire town. Daniel had arrived at Riverside 6 months earlier, placed with the Morrison family through emergency foster care. The Morrisons were kind people, but they ran a busy household with 3 biological children of their own. Daniel was given a small room in the basement, a space that smelled of laundry detergent and felt perpetually damp. He never complained. He had learned early in life that complaining changed nothing. The official story was simple. Daniel Carter had been found wandering alone near a highway rest stop in Nevada. No identification, no family contacts, no memory of how he got there. Social services had placed him in the system, and after months bouncing between temporary homes, he ended up in Riverside, Oregon. But that was only what the files said. The truth was far more complicated. What Daniel remembered, in fragments that came to him in dreams, was different. He remembered a large house with tall windows. He remembered the smell of jasmine in a garden. He remembered a woman's voice singing in another language, soft and melodic. And he remembered fear, sudden and overwhelming, the night everything disappeared. The social worker who had processed his case, Linda Vaughn, had been kind but puzzled. She told the Morrisons that Daniel's case was unusual. There were no missing persons reports matching his description. No records of a child fitting his age and appearance. It was as if he had simply appeared out of nowhere. Mrs. Morrison had asked Daniel directly, just once, if he remembered anything about his parents. Daniel had looked at her with those wide, dark eyes and said nothing, because the truth was he remembered everything. He just didn't know if anyone would believe him. At school, the teasing continued for weeks. Marcus and his friends made a game of it, inventing stories about Daniel's origins. One day, they said he was the child of criminals. Another day, they claimed he had escaped from a psychiatric hospital. The stories grew more elaborate and cruel. Daniel endured it all in silence, until the day Mr. Brennan, the history teacher, assigned a project that would change everything. "I want each of you to research your family history," Mr. Brennan announced to the class. "Interview relatives. Find old photographs. Trace your lineage back at least 2 generations. This project is worth 30% of your grade." The classroom buzzed with excitement. Kids immediately started talking about grandparents and great-aunts, about immigration stories and family heirlooms. Daniel sat frozen at his desk. Marcus turned around with a smirk. "What are you going to do, Danny? Make something up?" The laughter started again. Mr. Brennan silenced the class with a stern look. "Everyone will complete this assignment. No exceptions. If you need help accessing records, see me after class." When the bell rang, Daniel approached the teacher's desk slowly. Mr. Brennan was sorting through papers, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "Sir, I can't do the project," Daniel said quietly. Mr. Brennan looked up. "Why not?" "I don't have a family." The teacher studied him for a moment. "Everyone has a family, Daniel, even if you don't live with them." Daniel hesitated. Then, In a voice so low Mr. Brennan had to lean in to hear. He said, "What if I told you I do remember my family, but nobody believes me when I tell them where I came from?" Mr. Brennan set down his pen. "Try me." Daniel took a deep breath. "My real name isn't Daniel Carter. That's the name they gave me at the hospital in Nevada. My real name is Daniel Alejandro Mendoza Reyes, and I come from a place that doesn't exist anymore." The history teacher's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "What do you mean doesn't exist?" "I mean it was erased. On purpose. By people who didn't want anyone to find it." Mr. Brennan pulled up a chair. "Daniel, I think you need to tell me the whole story." And for the first time in 6 months, Daniel began to speak. What he revealed over the next hour would set in motion a series of events that would uncover one of the most shocking cover-ups in modern American history. Daniel's story began not in Nevada, but in a place called Valle Sereno, a small, unincorporated community hidden in the mountains of northern New Mexico. It was not on any official maps. It had no registered residents, and according to government records, it had never existed. But Daniel remembered it clearly. Valle Sereno had been home to approximately 300 people, mostly families who had lived there for generations. The community was self-sufficient, built around a natural spring that provided water year-round. The residents grew their own food, raised livestock, and maintained a small schoolhouse where Daniel and the other children learned. His mother, Elena Mendoza, was the community's teacher. His father, Rafael Reyes, was a craftsman who built furniture and repaired tools. They lived in a modest adobe house at the edge of the settlement, surrounded by pinyon trees and wildflowers. Daniel remembered his childhood there as peaceful. He remembered helping his father sand wood in the workshop. He remembered his mother reading to him under the cottonwood tree. He remembered neighbors gathering for celebrations, everyone bringing food and music. It was a simple life, but it was his life. Until the night the government came. Daniel was 10 years old when it happened. He woke to the sound of helicopters overhead, their searchlights cutting through the darkness. His father rushed into his room, pulling him from bed. "Daniel, listen to me very carefully," his father said, gripping his shoulders. "You need to hide. Right now. Do not come out, no matter what you hear." His mother appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. She pressed something into his hands, a small leather pouch, and kissed his forehead. "Remember who you are," she whispered. "Remember where you come from." His father carried him to the root cellar beneath the kitchen, a space dug into the earth where they stored vegetables. He lowered Daniel inside and covered the entrance with the heavy wooden door. "Stay quiet," his father commanded. "Do not make a sound." Then the door closed, and Daniel was alone in the darkness. What happened next, he could only piece together from sounds. Engines, shouting, doors being smashed open, his mother's voice pleading, his father's voice defiant. Then gunshots, sharp and final. Daniel pressed his hands over his mouth to keep from screaming. The sounds continued for hours. Boots marching through the house above him, furniture being overturned, glass shattering, and then, eventually, silence. Daniel waited in the cellar for 3 days. When he finally emerged, weak from hunger and thirst, Valle Sereno was gone. The houses had been demolished. The fields had been burned. The spring had been filled with concrete. Every trace of the community had been systematically erased. And the bodies of his parents, along with everyone else he had ever known, had vanished. Daniel wandered through the ruins, calling for his mother and father, but there was no answer. He found the leather pouch his mother had given him still clutched in his hand. Inside was a silver locket, a folded document, and a small photograph of his family. He took these things and began walking. For days, he walked through the desert, following dirt roads and old trails. He drank from streams and ate wild berries. He slept under bushes and kept moving, driven by an instinct he didn't fully understand. Eventually, he reached a highway. A truck driver found him collapsed near a rest stop and called the authorities. The rest became the official story. Unidentified child, no memory, placed in foster care. But Daniel had never forgotten. He just didn't know why it had happened or who was responsible. Mr. Brennan listened to Daniel's story in stunned silence. When the boy finished, the teacher sat back in his chair, processing what he had heard. "Daniel, this is an extraordinary claim," he said carefully. "If what you're saying is true, then something terrible happened to you and your community. But I need to ask, do you have any proof?" Daniel reached into his backpack and pulled out the leather pouch. He opened it and laid the contents on the desk. The silver locket had a faded photograph inside showing a young woman and a man, clearly Daniel's parents. The photograph was a family portrait. Daniel as a small child standing between Elena and Raphael, all three smiling. But it was the folded document that made Mr. Brennan's eyes widen. It was a land grant, dated 1848, written in Spanish and English, granting the Mendoza family ownership of a parcel of land in the New Mexico territory. The document bore official seals and signatures, including one from a territorial governor. "This is real," Mr. Brennan murmured, examining the document closely. "This is a legitimate historical land grant. My mother told me it had been in our family for generations," Daniel said. "She said it proved that Valle Sereno belonged to us, that no one could take away." Mr. Brennan looked at Daniel with a mixture of sympathy and alarm. "But someone did take it away." "Yes, and I want to know why." The teacher was quiet for a long moment. Then he made a decision. "Daniel, I believe you, and I think we need to investigate this properly. But we're going to need help." Over the following weeks, Mr. Brennan reached out to contacts he had in journalism and historical research. He sent photographs of the land grant to experts who confirmed its authenticity. He searched archives for any reference to Valle Sereno, but found nothing in official records. It was as if the place had been deliberately scrubbed from history. Meanwhile, at school, Daniel continued to endure the mockery of his classmates. Marcus and his friends had gotten hold of rumors about the crazy stories Daniel was telling Mr. Brennan, and the teasing intensified. "Danny thinks he's from some secret village," Marcus announced loudly in the hallway. "Probably watches too many movies." Daniel said nothing. He had learned that trying to defend himself only made things worse. But one person did believe him. Her name was Sarah Chun, a quiet girl who sat 2 rows ahead of Daniel in history class. She had overheard part of his conversation with Mr. Brennan and had been curious ever since. One day after school, she approached Daniel in the library. "I heard what you told Mr. Brennan," she said, "about the place that was erased." Daniel tensed, expecting more ridicule. But Sarah surprised him. "I believe you. My grandmother came from a village in China that was flooded when they built a dam. The government moved everyone out and destroyed all the records. She says it's like her home never existed." For the first time in months, Daniel felt understood. Sarah became his ally. Together, they helped Mr. Brennan research, searching online archives, requesting documents through Freedom of Information Act requests, and compiling a timeline of events. What they discovered was chilling. In the early 2010s, the federal government had identified several parcels of land in New Mexico as containing valuable mineral deposits, including rare earth elements critical for technology manufacturing. These parcels included the land where Valle Sereno had stood. But there was a problem. The land was legally owned by families who held old Spanish and Mexican land grants, many of which had been upheld in court for over a century. So the government found another way. They declared the area a national security zone, claimed the presence of hazardous materials, and ordered an immediate evacuation. Residents were given 24 hours to leave. But according to the documents Sarah and Daniel uncovered, the residents of Valle Sereno had refused. They argued that the land was theirs by right, and no evacuation order could supersede a legal land grant. The government responded with force. What happened next was classified, but Daniel's memories filled in the gaps. The midnight raid, the helicopters, the systematic destruction of the community, and the disappearance of everyone who had lived there. The official explanation, buried in obscure government reports, claimed that Valle Sereno had been voluntarily abandoned, and that all residents had been relocated and compensated. But there were no records of compensation, no records of relocation, no records of the people at all. They had been erased. And Daniel, hidden in a root cellar, had been the only survivor. When Mr. Brennan presented these findings to the school administration, hoping to get support for a formal investigation, he was met with resistance. The principal, Dr. Harmon, was uncomfortable with the implications. "This is a very serious accusation, Tom," he said to Mr. Brennan. "You're suggesting the government committed a crime. We can't get involved in something like this." "But we already are involved," Mr. Brennan insisted. "We have a student who witnessed a massacre. We have historical documents proving illegal seizure of land. We have a moral obligation to help him." Dr. Harmon shook his head. "I'm sorry, but this is beyond the scope of what a school can handle. I suggest you drop it." But Mr. Brennan refused to drop it. Instead, he reached out to a journalist he knew from his college days, Rachel Kim, an investigative reporter for a major national newspaper. He sent her everything they had found. Rachel was skeptical at first, but when she examined the land grant and cross-referenced it with federal land records, she realized the story was real. "If this is true," she told Mr. Brennan over the phone, "this could be one of the biggest government cover-ups in recent history." She agreed to investigate. As Rachel began digging deeper, strange things started happening. Mr. Brennan's car was broken into, though nothing was stolen. Sarah's family received an anonymous letter warning them to stop asking questions. And Daniel noticed a black sedan parked across the street from the Morrison house, the same car appearing day after day. Someone was watching. The pressure intensified when Dr. Harmon called Daniel into his office one afternoon. Sitting beside the principal was a man in a dark suit who introduced himself as Agent Carlson from the Department of the Interior. "Daniel, we understand you've been making some claims about your past," Agent Carlson said in a voice that was calm but cold. "We're here to help clarify a few things." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. "I've only been telling the truth." "The truth can be complicated," the agent replied. "Sometimes our memories play tricks on us, especially when we've been through trauma. We believe what happened to you was that you got separated from your family during a voluntary relocation program. It's unfortunate, but not unusual." "That's not what happened." Agent Carlson leaned forward. "Daniel, if you continue spreading misinformation about government operations, it could cause serious problems, not just for you, but for the people helping you. Do you understand?" It was a threat, thinly veiled, but unmistakable. Dr. Harmon looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Daniel met the agent's eyes and made a choice. "I understand." But he didn't stop. That night, he met with Sarah and Mr. Brennan at the public library. They reviewed everything they had, every document, every piece of evidence. And they made copies, lots of copies, storing them in different locations. "They're trying to scare us into silence," Mr. Brennan said. "But we're not going to let that happen." Rachel Kim's investigation moved forward. She traveled to New Mexico and located the site where Valle Sereno had been. The area was now surrounded by chain-link fencing with no trespassing signs. Armed security guards patrolled the perimeter. She managed to interview a few elderly residents from neighboring areas who remembered Valle Sereno. They confirmed that the community had existed and that it had been destroyed overnight. "They came in like an invading army," one old man told her. "We heard the explosions for miles away. By morning, there was nothing left." Rachel also discovered that several federal employees who had been involved in the operation had since died under suspicious circumstances, including 2 who had been preparing to blow the whistle. The pattern was clear. Someone was willing to kill to keep the truth buried. As Rachel prepared to publish her story, she received a visit from government attorneys threatening legal action if she printed unsubstantiated allegations. Her editor was pressured to kill the piece. But Rachel had one advantage. She had Daniel's testimony, and she had the land grant. The story ran on the front page of the newspaper on a Sunday morning in early March. The headline read, "The Village That Vanished. Government Accused of Erasing New Mexico Community." The response was immediate and explosive. News networks picked up the story. Social media erupted with outrage. Human rights organizations demanded an investigation. Members of Congress called for hearings. And Daniel Carter, the orphan kid everyone had laughed at, became the face of a movement for truth and justice. At school, the atmosphere shifted overnight. Marcus Webb, who had tormented Daniel for months, approached him in the hallway with his head down. "I'm sorry," Marcus said quietly. "I didn't know. None of us knew." Other students apologized too. Teachers who had dismissed Daniel's struggles now looked at him with respect and sympathy. But Daniel didn't feel triumphant. He felt hollow, because no amount of attention or apologies would bring his parents back. The legal battle that followed was long and complex. Attorneys representing the families of Valle Sereno's lost residents filed a class action lawsuit against the federal government, demanding compensation and a full accounting of what had happened. The government fought back hard, claiming national security exemptions and sovereign immunity. They argued that the land seizure had been legal under eminent domain and that the use of force had been justified. But the land grant Daniel's mother had given him became the key piece of evidence. Historical experts testified that it was legally binding and that the government had no right to seize the land without proper compensation or due process. After 2 years of litigation, a federal judge ruled in favor of the plaintiffs. The government was ordered to pay significant damages to the surviving families and to declassify all documents related to the Valle Sereno operation. When the documents were finally released, they confirmed what Daniel had always known. The government had deliberately destroyed the community, killed those who resisted, and covered up the crime. Several high-ranking officials were forced to resign. Criminal investigations were opened, though most of those directly responsible were already dead or beyond the reach of justice. For Daniel, the victory was bittersweet. He had proven his story was true. He had honored the memory of his parents and his community, but he would never get them back. The Morrison family, who had supported him throughout the ordeal, formally adopted Daniel. He kept both his names, becoming Daniel Alejandro Mendoza Reyes Carter, a symbol of two identities merged into one. Mr. Brennan continued teaching, but he also co-authored a book with Rachel Kim about the Valle Sereno case, ensuring the story would never be forgotten. Sarah Chun remained Daniel's closest friend, and together they started a student organization dedicated to researching and preserving the histories of marginalized communities. On the first anniversary of the story's publication, Daniel returned to the site where Valle Sereno had stood. The fences had been removed, and a memorial had been erected, a simple stone marker engraved with the names of all those who had lived there. Daniel placed flowers at the base of the memorial and stood in silence, the wind whispering through the pinyon trees that had survived the destruction. He thought about his mother's last words, "Remember who you are. Remember where you come from." He had remembered, and now the world would remember too. As he turned to leave, he noticed something growing near the memorial, a single wildflower pushing through the cracked earth, fragile but resilient. It was a small sign of life, returning to a place that had been meant to stay dead forever. Daniel smiled, for the first time in years, a real smile. They had laughed at the orphan kid. They had called him a liar and a dreamer. But he had revealed where he came from. And in doing so, he had made sure that Valle Sereno and everyone who had lived there would never be erased again.